The ceremonial plate trembled in Alara Snowveil's pale hands as her sisters shoved her forward, their smiles sharp as daggers against the cold marble of the Vampire King's great hall. The servant-dark fabric of her gown whispered against her skin, shadow and smoke against the moon-white of her hair as she stumbled toward the raised throne where Kaelin Stormborn sat in lethal stillness. Her eldest sister, Varel, had painted her lips crimson and wore a gown of midnight silk that clung to every curve, cut to display the elegant column of her throat. The middle sister, Maressa, had woven jewels through her dark curls and perfumed herself with rare oils that made nobles turn their heads as she passed. They had schemed for weeks, these sisters who shared her bloodline, but not her compassion, plotting how to capture the attention of Kaelin Stormborn, the Vampire King whose very name made immortals bow and mortals flee. But when the tribunal demanded someone present the king with a ceremonial plate, the ancient ritual that opened formal judgment, they had seized Alara by her slender wrists and thrust the gleaming silver into her trembling fingers. "Go," Varel had hissed, her nails leaving crescent marks in Alara's pale skin. "You're the Omega. You serve. That's all you're good for." Maressa's laugh had been sweet poison. "Perhaps if you're fortunate, he'll glance at you before his eyes find someone worthy. Before we remind him what true nobility looks like." So Alara walked, her heart a caged bird beating against her ribs, her eyes downcast as an Omega should be, her footsteps silent as falling snow. The great hall stretched before her like an endless night, packed with vampires and wolves from every corner of the realm, their eyes tracking her movement, their whispers rustling like wind through dead trees. The chandeliers above cast fractured light across ancient stone, illuminating tapestries that depicted blood wars, legendary bonds, fates written in starlight and sealed in violence. She could feel him before she saw him. Thank you for joining me today, my wonderful family. Before we dive into this epic tale of fate, power, and forbidden love, I need you to do something for me. If you're already excited about today's story and ready to experience Alara and Kaelin's journey, smash that subscribe button right now. And here's what I really want to know. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from, because tomorrow I'll be bringing you another captivating story that's just as intense and romantic as this one, and trust me, you absolutely don't want to miss it. Your support means everything to this channel, and it helps me keep bringing you these incredible stories. Now, are you ready? Let's step into the Vampire King's court and witness the moment that changes everything. Let the story begin. The Vampire King's presence was a gravitational force pulling at something deep within her chest, something she had never felt before and could not name. The air around the throne seemed charged, electric, as though lightning waited just beneath the surface of the world. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her sister's hands had pushed her past the point of retreat, and now there was only forward, only him. Alara climbed the 3 steps to the throne, her knees weak, her breath shallow. She kept her gaze fixed on the plate in her hands, watching how the candlelight caught the silver's polished surface, how her reflection wavered in its gleam, pale and insignificant. "Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling of the great hearth fires. "The tribunal's offering." Silence fell like snow over the hall. Even the flames seemed to still dance. And then, for the first time in her life, Alara Snowveil made the mistake, the miracle, of looking up. Kaelin Stormborn was a creature carved from winter and war. He sat upon his throne of blackened iron and ancient bone, broad-shouldered and tall even in repose, his presence filling the space around him like darkness fills a tomb when the last torch dies. His hair, pale as starlight, fell past his shoulders in waves that spoke of centuries barely contained. His face held the brutal beauty of something made for killing, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could have been carved from marble, lips that had pronounced death sentences in a dozen languages. His eyes, crimson as fresh blood, had been studying the assembled court with an expression of profound disinterest until they found her. The moment their eyes met, something shattered in the air between them. Alara felt it like a physical thing, a silver thread pulled taut, a song she had never heard but had been humming all her life suddenly given voice. Heat rushed through her veins like liquid fire. Her breath caught. The plate nearly slipped from her fingers. The vampire king's expression transformed. The boredom vanished, replaced by something raw and startled, something that looked almost like recognition, like a man finding something he had lost before he even knew to search for it. His crimson eyes widened, and for a heartbeat, the most feared creature in the realm looked utterly, devastatingly human. He leaned forward slowly, his powerful hands gripping the arms of his throne with enough force that the metal groaned, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made Alara's knees buckle. She caught herself, steadied her hands, and extended the plate toward him with all the grace she could summon. Her sister's whispers had died somewhere behind her. The entire hall held its breath. Kalen Stormborn reached out, and when his fingers brushed against hers as he took the plate, a spark of energy passed between them, bright and sharp as a lightning strike, warm as summer sun on frozen ground. The chandeliers flickered. The air pressure changed. Alara gasped softly. The king's eyes flashed brighter for just an instant, ancient power rising to the surface, recognizing, claiming, knowing. "Your name," he said, his voice deep and rough as distant thunder. The plate sat forgotten in his hand, his entire focus narrowed to her face. "Tell me your name." Alara swallowed hard, her throat dry as parchment. "Alara, your majesty. Alara Snowveil." "Alara," he repeated, as though tasting each syllable, as though her name were a prayer he had forgotten how to speak. His gaze traveled over her face, her white hair catching lamplight like captured moonbeams, her eyes wide and gray as winter storms. The dark servant's gown seemed to make her glow against its shadows, moonlight and midnight, ice and obsidian. From behind her, Varel's voice rang out, honey-sweet and poisonous. "Your Majesty, our youngest sister is clumsy and simple-minded. She begged to be allowed to serve you, though we told her she wasn't worthy. Please forgive her presumption." Maressa stepped forward, her jewels shimmering, her smile calculated to devastate. "We, your loyal subjects, would be honored to attend to your needs personally. Our sister is merely an Omega, after all. Surely you would prefer company more befitting your ancient status." The temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kalen Stormborn's eyes never left Alara's face, but the warmth that had been building there turned to permafrost when he finally, slowly, turned his attention to her sisters. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority, the kind of power that had ended bloodlines and rewritten histories. "I did not ask for your names," he said quietly, each word precisely cut. "I did not ask for your presence. I asked for hers." Varel's face flushed crimson. Maressa's smile froze and cracked like ice over deep water. The court erupted in whispers, a storm of shock and speculation that swept through the hall like wind through a graveyard. Nobles leaned toward each other. Vampires exchanged glances sharp with political calculation, and wolves caught the scent of power shifting like tectonic plates beneath their feet. Kalen turned back to Alara, and his expression softened, the brutal edges giving way to something that looked almost like wonder, almost like fear. "Step closer," he said, and it was not a command but a request, gentler than she had ever heard such a voice could be. "Please." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct told her to run, but something stronger, something that lived in her bones and sang in her blood, told her to stay. She took one step forward, then another, until she stood close enough to see the flecks of deeper crimson in his blood-red eyes, close enough to smell pine and winter storms and something ancient clinging to his skin. "You feel it too," he said softly, meant only for her ears. "Don't you?" It was not a question. Alara nodded, unable to speak, unable to deny the truth that thrummed between them like a living thing. She had heard stories all her life about the blood bond, the sacred, forbidden connection that tied true mates together, soul to soul, heart to immortal heart. She had never expected to find it. Omegas rarely did. They were meant to serve, to support, to fade into the background of greater wolves and vampires' lives. But here she stood, trembling before the vampire king of all the realm, feeling a connection so powerful it threatened to unmake everything she had ever been told about her place in the world. But Alara Snowveil had not always stood in throne rooms or caught the attention of kings. She had not always felt power thrumming through her veins like wildfire. No, her story had begun in shadow, in the margins of noble life, where Omegas learned early that survival meant silence and strength meant endurance. The silence in the great hall stretched like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. Kaelin Stormborn rose from his throne. The movement was unhurried, deliberate, but it carried the weight of continents shifting. Every vampire and wolf in the assembled court felt it, that primal recognition of a predator uncoiling, of power no longer leashed by ceremony. The vampire king stood at his full height, and the shadows in the hall seemed to deepen around him, drawn to him like iron filings to a lodestone. "The tribunal," he said, his voice cutting through the whispers like a blade through silk, "is suspended." The court erupted. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A wolf lord near the back half rose from his seat before his companion pulled him down. Ancient vampires who had witnessed centuries of protocol exchanged glances sharp with calculation and shock. The High Chancellor, a vampire elder whose robes bore the sigils of 7 fallen houses, stepped forward from his position beside the dais. "Your Majesty," the Chancellor said carefully, his voice carrying the weight of institutional authority, "the tribunal has been convened according to laws written in the First Blood Accord. To suspend it without cause is to... Without cause." Kaelin's crimson eyes flashed. "I have found my blood bond, Chancellor. That is enough to halt the machinery of the realm." The words fell like hammer blows. Blood bond. The 2 words ignited the court like flame to tinder. Nobles surged to their feet. Wolves exchanged sharp, disbelieving glances. Vampires who had lived through the extinction of entire bloodlines started with something approaching awe or horror. "Impossible," someone whispered. "With an Omega? The king has never." Varel's voice cut through the chaos, desperate and sharp. "Your Majesty, please, you must be mistaken. Our sister is nothing. She has no bloodline worth claiming, no power, no..." Silence. The word was soft, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Varel's mouth snapped shut, as though invisible hands had closed around her throat. Kaelin's gaze found her in the crowd, and the look in his eyes was not anger. It was something far more dangerous. Disinterested. The kind of dismissal that ended political careers and reduced noble houses to footnotes in history. Maressa stepped forward, her jewels catching the light, her voice honeyed with calculated charm. "Your Majesty, if you seek companionship, surely there are those more suited to..." "You mistake me," Kaelin said, his tone precise as a surgeon's blade. "I am not seeking. I have found. And what I have found is not subject to your judgment, your approval, or your ambition." He turned his back on them, a gesture more devastating than any verbal rebuke. When he faced Alara again, something in his expression shifted. The brutal edges softened, though the power remained, thrumming beneath his skin like caged lightning. Alara's heart hammered so hard, she thought it might shatter her ribs. Her mind raced with fragments of understanding, none of them complete. Blood bond. The king. Her. It was impossible. It had to be a mistake, or worse, a game whose rules she didn't understand and whose ending would be her destruction. "Commander Theron," Kaelin called, never taking his eyes from Alara. A vampire warrior materialized from the shadows at the edge of the dais, tall, scarred, ancient. His armor bore the marks of 1,000 battles, and his eyes held the flat, professional calm of someone who had carried out orders that would haunt lesser creatures forever. "Your Majesty, escort Lady Snowveil to the Northern Tower, the royal guest chambers. Post guards at her door, for her protection, not her imprisonment. No one enters without my explicit command. No one." Terror shot through Alara like ice water. The Northern Tower. Isolated. Guarded. She had heard stories of nobles who disappeared into royal towers and emerged only as cautionary tales. Her hands began to shake. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't understand. I didn't mean to." Kalen moved with supernatural speed, closing the distance between them until he stood close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his skin, could see the conflict warring in his crimson eyes. "You are not being punished," he said quietly, meant only for her. "You are being protected. From them. From what comes next." What comes next? The question escaped before Alara could stop it. Something like pain flickered across Kalen's face. "War," he said simply. "In all but name." Behind them, the court had descended into barely controlled chaos. Wolf lords clustered in tight groups, their conversations sharp and urgent. Vampire elders formed their own constellation of power near the great hearth, their faces masks of calculation. And through it all, Alara could feel eyes on her, assessing, judging, measuring her worth against centuries of precedent and finding her catastrophically wanting. The High Chancellor approached again, his aged face grave. "Your Majesty, you understand what this means. The Houses of Night will demand proof. The Wolf Councils will invoke the old laws. And the Blood Synod. Let them come," Kalen said, his voice carrying across the hall, silencing every conversation. "Let every house, every council, every ancient authority question what fate has written. The bond is awakened. It cannot be ignored. It cannot be reasoned away." He paused, and when he spoke again, his words fell like stones into still water. "It can only be challenged." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Challenge meant ritual combat. Challenge meant blood. Challenge meant that anyone who questioned the bond could demand Kalen prove, through violence, through dominance, through the ancient laws that govern vampire and wolf alike, that he was worthy of it. Alara felt the world tilting beneath her feet. This wasn't just her life that had shattered in a single moment of eye contact. It was the stability of two kingdoms, the careful balance of power that had held for centuries. Commander Theron's hand appeared at her elbow, steady and surprisingly gentle. "My lady," he said quietly. "Please, come with me." Alara looked up at Kalen one last time. His crimson eyes met hers, and in them she saw something that terrified her more than his power, more than his reputation, more than the chaos swirling around them. She saw certainty. He nodded once, a gesture of reassurance and command intertwined. And as Commander Theron led her through the parting crowd, past her sister's stricken faces, past nobles who whispered and stared, Alara felt the silver thread of the bond pulling taut between them, undeniable, unbreakable, and utterly, catastrophically real. The northern tower chamber was a gilded cage. Alara stood at the window, her fingers pressed against glass that overlooked the castle grounds far below. Moonlight silvered the distant forests, painting everything in shades of blue and shadow. The room behind her was more luxurious than anywhere she had ever slept, silk curtains in deep crimson, furniture carved from ancient wood, a bed large enough for 3 people draped in furs soft as clouds. And yet the 2 guards stationed outside her door might, as well have been iron bars. She had been here for 3 hours. No explanations. No visitors. Only the oppressive weight of luxury and the suffocating knowledge that her entire world had shattered in the space of a heartbeat. The knock came softly, unexpectedly. Alara turned as the door opened, and Kalen Stormborn filled the doorway. He had removed his ceremonial cloak, but he still wore the dark tunic embroidered with silver thread, still carried the weight of centuries in his bearing. His crimson eyes found hers immediately, and she felt that pull again, the silver thread drawing taut between them. "May I enter?" he asked. The question surprised her. Kings did not ask permission. "It's your castle," Alara said quietly. "Your kingdom. But it is your sanctuary. For now." He stepped inside, and the guards closed the door behind him with a soft click. He moved to stand near the fireplace, careful to maintain distance between them. "You're afraid of me." It wasn't a question, but Alara answered anyway. Should I not be? A muscle tightened in Kalen's jaw. Perhaps. But not for the reasons you think. He gestured toward the chairs near the fire.
Please, sit.
I owe you an explanation, though I suspect it will bring little comfort. Alara sat, her hands folded in her lap to stop them from shaking. Kalen remained standing, his profile stark against the firelight, his expression unreadable. The blood bond, he began, his voice low and measured, is the rarest phenomenon in our world. It cannot be forced, cannot be chosen, cannot be predicted. When it awakens, it binds two souls so completely that to sever it means death for both. It has not been seen in this realm for over 2 centuries. And you never expected to experience it, Alara said softly. I am over 600 years old, Kalen said. I have lived through wars, plagues, the rise and fall of dynasties. I believed myself beyond such fate, incapable of it. His eyes met hers. I was wrong. The vulnerability in those words struck her like a physical blow. Why does it terrify them? Alara asked. The court. The elders. Why is this bond a threat? Kalen's expression darkened. Because you are an Omega. Because ancient law, written when vampires and wolves first formed their uneasy peace, dictates that blood bonds must reflect power and must strengthen bloodlines. The law specifically forbids bonds between ruling vampires and Omegas. It was designed to prevent exactly what has happened. Alara felt her chest tighten. So this bond is illegal. The bond itself cannot be illegal. It is fate. But my right to honor it, to claim it, to keep you, that is what they will challenge. He moved closer, his voice dropping. They will call you a weakness, a liability. They will say that I have endangered the realm by bonding with someone they deem unworthy. They're right, Alara whispered.
The words tasted like ash.
I am unworthy. I have no power, no bloodline, nothing to offer a king except everything. Kalen's voice was fierce. The bond does not make mistakes, Alara. Fate does not choose carelessly. But Alara could hear the doubt beneath his conviction, the question he wouldn't voice. What if fate had miscalculated this time? What if the bond had awakened between a king and someone who would destroy rather than strengthen his reign? She was a political weapon now, she realized, whether she wanted to be or not. A sharp knock interrupted them. Commander Theron entered without waiting for permission, his scarred face grave. He carried a leather satchel that bulged with papers. The letters have begun arriving, Your Majesty, he said quietly. 12 formal challenges so far. More expected by dawn. Kalen's jaw clenched, but he nodded. From whom? House Silverthorn. The Wolf Council of the Northern Reaches. Lord Vex of the Blood Synod. And Theron hesitated. Your uncle, Lord Dareth Stormborn, has invoked ancestral right to contest. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Alara saw something flash in Kalen's eyes. Pain, quickly buried beneath layers of cold control.
Thank you, Commander.
That will be all. After Theron left, silence stretched between them. Alara watched Kalen's profile, saw the weight settling onto his shoulders like physical armor. You should rest, he said finally, not looking at her. Tomorrow will bring more challenges. More complications. He was already moving toward the door when Alara spoke. What happens if you refuse the bond? Kalen stopped, his hand on the door frame. For a long moment, he didn't answer. When he finally turned, his expression was raw with something she couldn't name. We both die, he said simply.
Slowly.
Painfully. The bond, once awakened, demands acknowledgement. To deny it is to poison ourselves from the inside out. His crimson eyes held hers. But if you wish to flee, I will find a way to make your death swift and painless instead. The offer hung in the air, terrible and tender at once. Alara stood, her legs steadier than she expected. She thought of her sister's cruelty, of a lifetime spent apologizing for existing, of becoming invisible just to survive. She thought of the silver thread connecting her to this ancient, impossible creature who looked at her like she mattered. I'm not running, she said quietly. If fate made this choice, then I'll face it. I'll face all of them. Something like relief flickered across Kalen's face before he masked it. He nodded once, then disappeared into the corridor, leaving Alara alone with her choice and its terrible consequences. Before we continue with what happens when Alara faces her cruel sisters, I want to check in with you. Are you Team Alara or Team Sisters? Drop a comment and let me know what you think should happen next. And if you're loving this story so far, if you felt that electric moment when the bond awakened, if you're rooting for Alara to find her strength, please show some love by hitting that like button. It takes just 1 second, but it helps this story reach more people who love romance and fantasy just like you do. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? We've got so many more incredible stories coming your way, and you deserve to be notified the moment they drop. Alright, let's get back to the action. Alara's sisters are about to make a terrible mistake, and you won't believe what Kalen does about it. They came at dawn, when the light was still gray and uncertain. Alara woke to voices outside her chamber door. Commander Theron's low rumble and a woman's voice, honey-sweet and insistent. She recognized that tone. She had been hearing it her entire life. Maressa, the king himself granted us permission, her sister was saying. Surely you wouldn't deny us a moment with our own blood? We only wish to ensure she's well. Alara's stomach twisted. She sat up as the door opened, and her sisters swept into the room like a storm dressed in silk and jewels. Varel wore crimson that matched the vampire king's eyes. Maressa had chosen sapphire blue that made her dark curls gleam. They were beautiful, polished, perfect, everything Alara had been taught she could never be. Commander Theron stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. You have 10 minutes, he said flatly. I will be just outside. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a trap snapping shut. For a moment, the sisters simply stared at her. Then Varel's carefully composed expression cracked, revealing something raw and venomous beneath. Look at you, she said softly, in silk sheets and royal chambers. How convenient that you stumbled into fate's favor. We came to help you, Alara. Maressa's voice stripped false concern as she moved closer. You must be terrified. This is all happening so fast. You're not prepared for what's coming. Alara stood slowly, wrapping herself in the robe that had been laid out for her. What do you want? Want? Varel laughed, the sound brittle as breaking glass. We want what any loving sisters would want, to protect you from making a terrible mistake. Maressa reached out as if to take Alara's hand, her touch soft and familiar in a way that made Alara's skin crawl. The king will tire of you, darling. You know this. You've always known your place. Once the novelty of this bond fades, what then? You'll have nothing. You'll be nothing. Again. The words found their mark with practiced precision. Alara felt them sink in, reopening wounds that had never truly healed. You'll be nothing. Again. Memory rose unbidden. Alara at 8 years old, her birthday forgotten while the household celebrated Varel's engagement. At 12, her accomplishments were dismissed because Omegas don't need education. Alara at 15, watching her sisters dance at a ball while she served wine to nobles who looked through her as if she were made of glass. We only ever wanted what was best for you, Varel continued, her voice taking on that wounded tone she wielded like a blade. If you had stayed in your proper place, none of this would be happening. But you had to reach above yourself, had to catch his attention. I didn't ask for this, Alara said quietly. Didn't you? Maressa's mask slipped further, revealing the rage beneath. You've always been jealous. Always watching us with those envious eyes, wishing you could be more than what you are. And now you've found a way to steal what should have been ours. Steal? The word sparked something in Alara's chest, something that had been building since the moment she stood before Kalen's throne. I stole nothing. I served you. I obeyed you. I made myself small so you could feel large. And you repaid me by throwing me at the king's feet like a sacrifice. Varel's eyes flashed. We gave you an opportunity to serve someone important. You tried to humiliate me. Alara's voice was steady now, clear in a way it had never been before. You dress me in servant's clothes and push me forward, hoping I would fail so spectacularly that your own brilliance would shine brighter by contrast. You didn't expect fate to have other plans. Fate. Maresa's laugh was harsh. You think this is fate? This is a mistake. A cosmic error. You are not meant for thrones and crowns, Alara. You are meant to fade into the background where you belong. Perhaps I was meant for that. Alara met her sister's eyes without flinching. But fate chose differently. And unlike you, I won't spend my life fighting what I cannot change. How dare you? Varel started forward, her hand raised. The door burst open. Kaelin Stormborn filled the doorway, Commander Theron at his shoulder. The Vampire King's crimson eyes took in the scene with deadly precision. Varel's raised hand, Maresa's cruel expression, Alara's trembling defiance. Step away from her, Kaelin said, his voice soft as silk and sharp as steel.
Now.
The sisters stumbled back, their faces draining of color. Kaelin moved into the room with predatory grace, positioning himself between Alara and her sisters. The protective gesture was subtle, but unmistakable. Your Majesty, Maresa began, her voice trembling. We were only... I know exactly what you were doing. Kaelin's gaze could have frozen blood. I heard every word. Varel's carefully constructed composure shattered. She's an Omega. She doesn't deserve. What she deserves, Kaelin interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, is not for you to decide. Commander Theron, effective immediately, Lady Varel and Lady Maresa Snowvale are stripped of all court privileges. Their invitations to royal functions are revoked. Their petitions will no longer be heard. Their presence at court is no longer welcome. You can't. Varel's protest died as Kaelin's eyes flashed dangerously bright. I am the Vampire King. I can do precisely as I wish. He paused, letting the silence stretch. You sought to elevate yourselves by crushing your sister. Instead, you have destroyed your own futures. There is poetry in that, I think. Maresa's face crumpled, her beauty twisting into something ugly and desperate. Please, Your Majesty. Leave, Kaelin said simply. And do not return. Commander Theron stepped forward, and the sisters had no choice but to follow him toward the door. Varel cast one last look at Alara, pure venom and disbelief warring in her expression. Then they were gone, and the chamber fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Alara's legs gave out. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands shaking with the aftermath of confrontation. Kaelin moved to stand before her, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle. They will trouble you no more. Alara looked up at him, this ancient creature who had just destroyed her sister's ambitions with a handful of words. They were right about one thing, she said softly. I'm not prepared for this. Neither am I, Kaelin admitted, and the honesty in his voice made her breath catch. But we will face it together, if you're willing. Alara thought of her sisters' faces as they left, the shock, the rage, the dawning realization that they had gambled everything and lost. She thought of years spent making herself invisible and the terrifying freedom of finally being seen. I'm willing, she said, and meant it. The summons arrived at midnight, delivered by 3 robed figures who materialized in the great hall like shadows given form. Alara stood beside Kaelin on the dais, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a position that would have been unthinkable a week ago. The court had gathered in response to urgent messengers, nobles stumbling from their beds still half-dressed, their faces pale with apprehension. The eldest of the robed figures stepped forward, his face hidden within the depths of his hood. When he spoke, his voice echoed with the weight of centuries. By the authority of the Blood Synod, by the ancient laws written in the First Blood Accord, by the will of the 7 houses and the wolf councils of all territories, he unrolled a scroll that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. We hereby invoke the Blood Tribunal. The words fell like stones into dark water. Alara felt Kaelin's arm tense beneath her fingers. Around them, the court erupted in whispers that sounded like the rustle of dead leaves. The Blood Tribunal. Even she had heard the stories, ancient, merciless, unseen for over 300 years. The charges, the robed figure continued, his voice cutting through the chaos, are as follows: that King Kaelin Stormborn has bound himself to one unworthy of such honor. That he has violated the covenant between vampire and wolf by claiming an Omega as his blood-bonded mate. That he has endangered the stability of the realm through his actions. Another robed figure stepped forward, a woman whose voice carried the sharp clarity of a blade drawn from its sheath. The Blood Tribunal will convene in 3 days' time. The king will face trial by combat, trial by testimony, and trial by divine blood judgment. If he fails any trial, the bond will be severed by ancient right, and his right to rule will be forfeit. And the Omega? Someone called from the crowd, a wolf lord whose face Alara couldn't see. The third robed figure answered, his voice cold as winter wind. If the bond is severed, the Omega dies. That is the law. The bond, once awakened, cannot exist in separation. One cannot live if the other is unmade. The words struck Alara like physical blows. She had known the bond meant death if denied, but hearing it spoken aloud, clinical, final, inevitable, made it real in a way that terror alone could not. Kaelin's voice rang out, steady and commanding despite the tremor Alara felt running through him. I accept the tribunal summons. I will answer all charges and defend my right to this bond. The robed figures bowed in unison, then dissolved back into shadow, leaving behind only the scroll that now floated before the dais, glowing with an eerie light before it too vanished. The council chamber was smaller, more intimate than the Great Hall. Kaelin had called together only his most trusted advisors, Commander Theron, the High Chancellor, and the ancient vampire Lady Cerithis, whose counsel had guided 3 kings before him. Lady Cerithis spoke first, her voice grave. The Blood Tribunal has not been invoked since the War of Sundered Houses. It is designed to be unwinnable, 3 trials, each more impossible than the last. Explain them, Kaelin commanded. Trial by combat, Commander Theron said, his scarred face grim. You will face a champion chosen by your challengers. The fight continues until death or submission. No mercy, no quarter. Trial by testimony, the High Chancellor added. You must justify the bond before the assembled lords, councils, and religious authorities. They will question everything. Your judgment, your worthiness, her value to the realm. Lady Cerithis leaned forward, her ancient eyes sad. And trial by divine blood judgment. You and the Omega will be bound in ritual and subjected to blood magic older than our kingdoms. The magic itself will judge whether the bond is true or false, worthy or corrupt. If it judges against you. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. How many kings have survived the Blood Tribunal? Alara asked quietly. The silence that followed was answer enough. Finally, Lady Cerithis spoke.
1.
King Aldrich the Unbroken. But he faced the tribunal for war crimes, not for matters of the heart. The trials are different when love is the question. Harsher. More unforgiving. The High Chancellor cleared his throat. There is another option. Lady Alara, if you were to withdraw your acceptance of the bond, if you were to renounce it publicly, the tribunal could be avoided. You would be exiled, certainly, but your life would be spared. You could live anonymously, far from here, and the king would.
No.
Alara's voice was steady. I won't run. I won't hide. If the bond is to stand, I stand with it. Kaelin turned to her, his crimson eyes wide with something that looked like anguish. Alara, you don't understand what you're choosing. The tribunal will destroy you. They will tear apart everything you are, everything you've endured. They will make you wish for death long before they grant it. I understand, Alara said, meeting his gaze. Better than you think. I've spent my entire life being told I'm worthless, that I don't deserve to be seen. If I run now, I will prove them right. If I die, at least I die standing. Kaelin's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. For a moment, the ancient king looked utterly human, vulnerable and terrified in a way that made Alara's heart ache. I cannot lose you, he whispered. Not when I've only just found you. Then don't lose, Alaris said simply.
Win.
We'll win together. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Ritual markings were painted on Kaelin's skin in silver ink mixed with ancient blood, symbols of protection, of strength, of divine favor. His armor was brought from the deepest vaults, black as midnight and etched with runes that glowed faintly in the dark. Alara watched as servants dressed him like a warrior preparing for his final battle, and perhaps that's exactly what this was. On the morning of the tribunal, Alara was given a gown of pure white, the color of sacrifice, of innocence, of judgment. Her pale hair was left loose, falling past her shoulders like a silver waterfall. No jewels, no adornments, just her, stripped bare before fate's examination. They walked together through the castle's ancient corridors, deeper than Alara had ever gone, until they reached a set of massive doors carved from black stone. The symbols etched into the surface writhed and shifted in the torchlight, alive with malevolent purpose. Commander Theron stood waiting, his expression grim. It's time, Your Majesty. Kaelin took Alara's hand one final time, raised it to his lips, and pressed a kiss to her knuckles that felt like both a promise and a goodbye. The doors groaned open, revealing a vast chamber lit by thousands of candles. The assembled court filled the space. Vampires, wolves, elders, challengers, all watching with predatory intensity. They stepped inside together. The doors sealed shut behind them with a sound like the closing of a tomb. The tribunal chamber was a cathedral of judgment. 3 thrones dominated the far end, occupied by the chief arbiters of the Blood Synod. To their left sat the vampire elders, robed in crimson and black. To their right, the wolf council members, their eyes gleaming with predatory interest. And between them, in the center of the vast space, stood Kaelin and Alara, exposed beneath the weight of 1,000 hostile gazes. The chief arbiter rose, his face still hidden within his hood. Let the accusations be heard. Lord Vex stepped forward first, his ancient frame draped in ceremonial robes that marked him as a founding member of the Blood Synod. His voice carried the certainty of scripture. Kaelin Stormborn has violated the First Blood Accord, which states explicitly, "No ruling vampire shall bind themselves to those of Omega blood, lest weakness corrupt the crown and chaos consume the realm." This law was written in the aftermath of the Sunder Houses, when King Matthias the Fool bound himself to an Omega and brought ruin to 3 kingdoms. The law exists to prevent such a catastrophe from occurring again. A wolf elder stood next, his gray beard braided with silver. The Omega is a liability. She has no power, no bloodline, no strength to offer the crown. She will produce weak offspring, if she can produce offspring at all. She endangers the succession and destabilizes centuries of carefully maintained alliances. One by one, they came forward. Nobles who questioned Alara's worth. Scholars who cited ancient texts. Warriors who spoke of strength as though it could only be measured in violence. Each testimony built upon the last, constructing a wall of precedent and tradition that seemed insurmountable. Through it all, Alara stood silent, her white gown stark against the darkness of the chamber. She felt each word like a blade, felt the weight of their collective rejection pressing down on her. But beneath the pain, something else was building, something that had been forged in years of cruelty and tempered in recent days of impossible choices.
Anger.
Not hot and explosive, but cold and clear as winter ice. When the last accuser finished speaking, the chief arbiter turned to Kaelin. The crown may now offer its defense. Kaelin stepped forward, his shoulders squared, his voice carrying the authority of 6 centuries. I do not deny the law exists, but I challenge its wisdom. The bond is not chosen, it is given by fate itself. To deny it is to deny the very forces that govern our existence. If the bond has awakened between myself and Alara Snowveil, then fate has deemed her worthy, regardless of what ancient prejudice might claim. His words were powerful, compelling, but Alara could see the doubt in the arbiters' faces. They had heard such arguments before, and precedent was a weight that even kings could not easily lift. "Is there any other testimony to be offered?" the chief arbiter asked. Alara's voice rang out before she could stop herself. "I would speak." The chamber fell silent. The chief arbiter's hidden face turned toward her. "The accused Omega wishes to address the tribunal?" "I do." A ripple of shock moved through the assembled court. Omegas did not speak at tribunals. They did not address councils. They existed in the margins, silent and subservient. "This is highly irregular," Lord Vex said, his voice sharp with disapproval. "Yet the law does not forbid it," the chief arbiter replied. After a long pause, he gestured toward Alara.
"Speak then.
But choose your words carefully." Alara stepped forward, her heart hammering but her voice steady. She did not look at the arbiters or the assembled nobles. She looked at the people scattered throughout the chamber, servants standing in the shadows, guards posted at the doors, the forgotten ones who knew what it meant to be dismissed. "You speak of strength as though it can only be measured by bloodline or battle," she began. "But I have learned a different kind of strength. The strength to endure when cruelty is easier than kindness. The strength to serve without losing dignity. The strength to survive in a world that tells you, every single day, that you do not matter." Her voice grew stronger, carrying to every corner of the vast space. "You say I am weak because I am an Omega, but I have survived things that would break most of you. I have lived without love, without respect, without hope, and still I rose each morning. Still I chose kindness when bitterness would have been justified. That is strength. Perhaps not the kind that wins wars, but the kind that builds civilizations worth defending." She saw Kalen watching her, his crimson eyes wide with something that looked like awe. "You fear I will corrupt the crown because I have no power," Alara continued. "But I am not asking for power. I am not asking to rule. I am asking only to exist beside someone who sees value in what I am, rather than disappointment in what I'm not. If that is corruption, then perhaps your definition of purity needs examination." A wolf elder leaned forward. "You speak eloquently for one so untested. But pretty words do not change the law." "No," Alara agreed. "But laws change when they no longer serve justice. I do not speak as the king's mate, seeking to justify my place. I speak as a citizen of this realm, asking when we decided that worth is something measured by birth rather than earned through living. When we decided that some lives matter more than others based solely on circumstances they did not choose." The silence that followed was different now, thoughtful rather than dismissive. Alara saw heads turning, whispered conversations beginning. Not agreement, perhaps, but the first cracks in certainty's armor. The chief arbiter's voice cut through the murmurs. "The Omega has spoken. Her words are noted." He paused, and when he continued, his tone carried the weight of inevitability. "However, tradition and law cannot be overturned by eloquence alone. The blood tribunal will proceed. Trial by combat will commence at dawn." Alara felt Kalen's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining. She had not changed their minds, not entirely, but she had made them listen. She had made them see her. And sometimes, being seen was its own kind of victory. The arbiters rose in unison, their robes sweeping the stone floor. "The tribunal is adjourned until the trial of blood. May fate guide the righteous." As the chamber began to empty, Alara caught sight of faces in the crowd, servants who nodded to her, guards whose expressions had softened, even a few nobles whose certainty seemed shaken. She had not won, but she had not lost either. Not yet. "Oh, this is a story, family. We've reached the moment everything has been building toward. The Blood Tribunal's combat trial is about to begin, and I can feel the tension just thinking about it. But before Kalen steps into that arena, I need to ask you something important. How many of you believe that love is worth fighting for? How many of you think Alara and Kalen can actually survive what's coming? Comment below with "Fight for Love" if you're standing with them. And listen, If this story has given you chills, if you felt every emotion right alongside these characters, please take 2 seconds to like this video and share it with someone who loves epic romance stories. Your engagement is what keeps this channel alive and allows me to bring you more content like this every single day. We're about to witness the most intense battle scene, where everything they've fought for hangs in the balance. Are you ready? Take a deep breath. Let's enter the arena together. Dawn broke over the tribunal grounds like a wound splitting open. The combat arena had been prepared in the castle's ancient courtyard, a circle of black stone etched with runes that glowed faintly in the early light. Beyond the circle, the assembled court formed concentric rings of witnesses, their faces pale and tense. This was no ceremonial display. This was blood judgment, old as the realm itself. Alara stood at the edge of the circle, flanked by guards who had been instructed to restrain her if necessary. She wore the white gown still, though now it felt less like purity and more like a shroud. Her hands gripped the cold stone barrier, knuckles white with tension. Kalen entered the arena from the east, his black armor gleaming like midnight made solid. He had removed his crown. Kings fought as warriors here, not as rulers. His pale hair was bound back, revealing the sharp planes of his face, the cold determination in his crimson eyes. He carried a long sword forged in an age before the current kingdoms existed, its blade inscribed with words in a language Alara didn't recognize. The challenger entered from the west. Lord Dareth Stormborn was Kalen's uncle, ancient even by vampire standards. His armor was silver white, adorned with the symbols of the old blood. He was broader than Kalen, his face carved with the scars of 1,000 battles. When he looked at his nephew, there was no warmth, only the cold calculation of a predator who had already chosen his prey. "I do this for the realm," Dareth announced, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "Not from malice, but from duty. You have allowed sentiment to corrupt judgment, nephew. I will free you from this weakness." Kalen's response was quiet, but it cut like steel. "You do this for ambition, uncle. You always have." The chief arbiter raised his staff. "The trial by combat begins. No mercy. No quarter. Only one may leave this circle standing. Let fate decide." The staff struck a stone. The world exploded into violence. Dareth moved with impossible speed, his blade a silver blur aimed at Kalen's throat. Kalen twisted away, his own sword rising to deflect the blow. The clash of metal rang out like a bell tolling doom. They separated, circled, attacked again, each movement precise, lethal, beautiful in its brutality. Alara watched, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break free from her chest. She had never seen combat like this, not the practiced duels of courtly entertainment, but real violence, ancient and unforgiving. Blood and survival distilled to their purest form. Kalen struck first blood, his blade opening a line across Dareth's shoulder. The older vampire barely flinched, pressing forward with renewed fury. Their swords met again and again, the sound echoing off stone walls, accompanied by the rasp of their breathing and the scrape of boots against ancient rock. Then Dareth changed tactics. He feinted left, and when Kalen moved to counter, the older vampire's blade found its mark, driving deep into Kalen's side, just below the ribs. The armor held for a heartbeat, then gave way with a sickening sound of tearing metal and flesh. Alara screamed. The pain hit her like lightning, white-hot and devastating. She felt the blade in her own side, felt her knees buckle, felt the cold stone as she collapsed against the barrier. Around her, guards rushed forward, but she barely registered their presence. All she could feel was Kalen's agony flooding through the bond, mixing with her own terror. In the arena, Kalen staggered backward, his hand pressed to the wound. Blood, impossibly red against his pale skin, seeped between his fingers. Dareth advanced, his silver blade raised for the killing blow. "Yield," the older vampire commanded. "This is over." But Kalen didn't yield. Something was happening. Something Alara felt building in her chest like a storm gathering strength. The bond, That silver thread that connected them suddenly blazed with light visible only to her. She felt it pulling at something deep within her, drawing up reserves she didn't know she possessed. Strength, she thought desperately, pressing her hand to her own side where phantom pain still burned. "Take my strength. All of it. Please." The bond responded. Energy flowed through her like a river breaking through a dam. Not her physical strength, but something deeper. Her will to survive. Her refusal to break. Every moment she had endured, every cruelty she had outlasted, every morning she had chosen to rise despite the weight of worthlessness, all of it poured through the bond toward Kalen. In the arena, Kalen's eyes flashed brilliant crimson. He straightened, the wound in his side still bleeding but no longer slowing him. When he moved, it was with renewed power, not just his own strength, but something augmented, something that transcended the merely physical. The bond had not healed him, but it had filled him with purpose sharper than any blade. Daretha's eyes widened. Impossible. Kalen struck with devastating precision. His sword became a blur of darkness, each blow driving his uncle backward. No longer defensive, no longer merely surviving, this was dominance, pure and absolute. The bond sang between Alara and Kalen, a harmony of two souls fighting as one. Dareth blocked, parried, desperately tried to regain control, but he was fighting more than just his nephew now. He was fighting the bond itself, fighting the truth that fate had chosen differently than tradition demanded. Kalen's blade found Daretha's sword hand, sending the silver weapon clattering across stone. Before his uncle could recover, Kalen's blade was at his throat, the edge pressing just hard enough to draw a single line of blood. "Yield," Kalen commanded, his voice resonating with power that made even the stones seem to tremble. For a long moment, Dareth stood frozen. Then, slowly, with the weight of bitter defeat, he sank to his knees. "I yield," he said, the words torn from him like confessions under torture. "The trial is yours." Kalen stepped back, lowering his blade. Blood still streamed from his wound, but he stood tall, unbroken. His eyes found Alara across the arena, and in that gaze she saw gratitude, wonder, and something that looked like love. The chief arbiter's voice cut through the stunned silence. "The trial by combat is concluded. Fate has spoken. The king stands victorious." One by one, the assembled court began to kneel. First the guards, then the servants, then even the nobles who had spoken against the bond. Like a wave spreading across the courtyard, they bowed before the truth that could no longer be denied. The bond had not made Kalen weak. It had made him unstoppable. Alara felt tears streaming down her face as she watched the impossible sight, an entire realm kneeling before a king who had fought not just for his crown, but for the right to choose his own heart. The first trial was won, but as Alara caught sight of the arbiter's shadowed faces, she knew the hardest test still lay ahead. The remaining trials passed in a blur of testimony and ritual that felt almost anticlimactic after the violence of combat. The trial by testimony saw Kalen defend every aspect of the bond before the assembled councils, his words measured and unyielding. Alara stood beside him throughout, no longer silent, no longer invisible. When challenged, she spoke. When questioned, she answered with a clarity that surprised even herself. The arbiters could find no fault in their reasoning, no weakness in their conviction. The trial by divine blood judgment came last, a ritual so ancient that even the eldest vampires whispered prayers before it began. Kalen and Alara were bound together with silver chains, their blood mingled in a ceremonial chalice, and subjected to magic that felt like being torn apart and reassembled at the molecular level. The pain was exquisite, unbearable, until suddenly it wasn't. The magic recognized what it found between them and withdrew, leaving behind a resonance that made the air itself seem to sing. The chief arbiter's voice, when it finally came, carried the weight of inevitability. The bond is true. Fate has judged. The tribunal finds in favor of King Kalen Stormborn. Now, as evening painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold, The entire court had assembled in the great hall for the final ceremony, the formal acknowledgement of the bond before the realm. Alara stood before the throne in a gown of deep midnight blue, no longer the white of sacrifice, but the color of sovereignty. Her pale hair had been woven with silver thread that caught the candlelight. She looked, for the first time in her life, like she belonged in a throne room. Kaelin descended from his throne, his wound from the trial bandaged, but his bearing regal and strong. He wore his crown again, the circlet of blackened silver that marked him as king. When he reached Alara, he took her hands in his, and the hall fell into reverent silence. Before this court, Kaelin said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast space, before the witnesses of both vampire and wolf kind, I claim Alara Snowveil as my blood-bonded mate. Not as property, not as possession, but as my equal in all things, my partner, my counsel, my other half. He released one of her hands to draw a ceremonial blade, small, ancient, inscribed with runes that glowed faintly. The blood claim is made visible, permanent, and irrevocable. What fate has bound, let no law, no tradition, no prejudice tear asunder. With practiced precision, he drew the blade across his palm. Blood welled, dark and rich. He offered the blade to Alara, and she took it with steady hands, mirroring his action. Their palms pressed together, blood mingling, and the bond flared to brilliant life. Light erupted between them, silver and crimson intertwined, spiraling up their joined hands like living vines. The glow spread across their skin, settling finally into visible marks that would remain forever. On Kaelin's wrist, a pattern of silver snowflakes appeared, delicate and intricate. On Alara's, crimson flames danced, eternal and bright. The bond marks, proof visible to any who looked that fate had chosen, and they had accepted. The court erupted in applause, not the grudging acknowledgement of defeated opponents, but genuine celebration. The trials had changed something fundamental. Those who had witnessed Kaelin's strength, Alara's courage, and the bond's undeniable truth could no longer deny what stood before them. The chief arbiter stepped forward, removing his hood for the first time to reveal an ancient face marked with the weight of centuries. The Blood Tribunal declares the bond lawful and binding. Alara Snowveil is recognized as bloodmate to King Kaelin Stormborn, with all rights and privileges that entails. He turned to address the assembled court. Furthermore, by tribunal decree, any who challenge this bond or seek to undermine it shall face the same trials the king endured and the same judgment. It was a warning and a protection wrapped in formal language. The challenges were over. Among the crowd, Alara glimpsed her sisters. Virel and Maressis stood near the back, stripped of their fine positions and glittering jewels, dressed in the simple garb of common nobility. Their faces were studies in bitterness and disbelief. When Virel's eyes met Alara's, the eldest sister looked away first, a surrender more complete than any words could convey. Kaelin must have noticed Alara's gaze, because he spoke again, his voice taking on the formal tone of royal decree. Lady Virel and Lady Maressis Snowveil are hereby stripped of all remaining titles and privileges. They are banished from court and forbidden from entering the royal territories for a period of 10 years. Their house name may remain, but their place within it is forfeit. The sisters bowed, not in respect, but because they had no choice, and were escorted from the hall by guards. Alara watched them go, feeling not triumph, but a strange, hollow relief. The cycle of their cruelty had finally ended. The ceremony concluded with feasting and celebration that stretched into the night. Nobles approached to offer congratulations, some genuine, others calculating their new position in a court that had fundamentally shifted. Alara navigated it all with growing confidence, Kaelin's steady presence at her side a constant reassurance. It was past midnight when they finally retreated to Kaelin's private chambers, rooms Alara had never seen before, decorated in dark woods and rich fabrics that spoke of centuries of accumulated history. Kaelin removed his crown, setting it on a table with a sigh that seemed to release weeks of tension. When he turned to Alara, the king fell away, leaving only the man, vulnerable, exhausted, and profoundly relieved. "We survived," he said simply. "We did," Alara agreed, touching the bond mark on her wrist, still marveling at its reality. Awakene crossed to her, his movements slow and deliberate. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with infinite gentleness. "You were magnificent. In the tribunal, in your speech, in everything. You saved me in that arena. You know that, don't you?" "We saved each other," Alara corrected softly. "That's what the bond means." He smiled then, a real smile, warm and unguarded in a way she had never seen before. "Yes," he said, "that's exactly what it means." When he kissed her, it was not the desperate kiss of survival or the performative kiss of ceremony. It was the kiss of two people who had fought fate and tradition and won the right to simply exist together. The bond mark on Alara's wrist glowed softly, echoing the one on Kalen's, proof that some things were stronger than law, deeper than tradition, and more enduring than any crown. They had won. For now, that was enough. 6 months after the blood tribunal, Alara stood in the council chamber and proposed a law that would have been unthinkable a year ago. "The Omega Protection Act," she said, her voice steady as she addressed the assembled nobles, elders, and council members, establishes that no Omega, vampire or wolf, can be stripped of inheritance rights based solely on their designation. They cannot be forced into servitude by family members. They cannot be offered as political pawns without their explicit consent. Around the table, reactions varied. Some nobles nodded thoughtfully. Others shifted uncomfortably, recognizing how such a law would dismantle centuries of accepted practice. But no one interrupted. No one dismissed her outright. That, more than anything, showed how much had changed. Lord Cashin, a vampire elder who had once spoken against the bond, leaned forward. "And if families resist? If they claim traditional rights?" "Then the crown intervenes," Kalen said from his position at the head of the table. He wore his crown, but his posture was relaxed, one hand resting casually near Alara's on the polished wood. "This law has my full support. We protect the vulnerable, or we admit that our civilization values cruelty over justice." The vote, when it came, was not unanimous, but it passed. As the council members filed out, several approached Alara privately, some to offer genuine support, others to calculate how this new power dynamic might serve their interests. She accepted both with equal grace, learning to navigate the complex currents of court politics with the same survival instincts that had kept her alive as a dismissed Omega. Commander Theron waited until the room had emptied before approaching. The scarred warrior had become an unlikely ally, his respect earned through watching Alara refuse to break under pressure that would have shattered most nobles. "The Wolf Council of the Northern Reaches has agreed to your proposed summit," he reported. "They'll send representatives next month to discuss unified Omega protections across territories." Alara felt a surge of satisfaction.
"Thank you, Commander."
"This matters." "I know," he said simply, then added with the ghost of a smile, "My sister is an Omega. She'll benefit from what you're building here. My family will not forget that." After he left, Kalen pulled Alara into his arms, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You're changing the world," he murmured. "One law at a time." "We're changing it," she corrected, echoing the words that had become their shared truth. The changes rippled outward like stones dropped in still water. The alliance between vampire and wolfkind, already strained before the tribunal, had paradoxically strengthened. The bond between a vampire king and a wolf Omega had forced both species to confront their shared prejudices. Joint councils were established. Trade agreements expanded. And slowly, carefully, the ancient suspicions began to soften. Kalen himself had evolved. He was still feared. That would never entirely fade, but now he was also respected in a different way. His court saw that he could be challenged and still emerge stronger. They saw that admitting vulnerability did not diminish authority. Where once he ruled through overwhelming force, now he ruled through a combination of strength and wisdom that made his reign more stable than it had ever been. Some evenings, Alara would find him in his study, bent over ancient texts, and he would look up with an expression of genuine curiosity rather than cold calculation. He asked questions now. He listened. He had learned that true power lay not in never needing others, but in choosing the right people to need. The quiet moments were Alara's favorite. Like tonight, when the demands of the crown and court had finally released them, and they sat together in their private chambers. Kaelin read from a book of ancient poetry while Alara worked on correspondence with the newly formed Omega Advocacy Council, a group she had founded to ensure that legal protections translated into real change. "Listen to this," Kaelin said, his voice soft in the candlelight. "What endures is not the crown we wear, but the hand we choose to hold when the weight becomes too great." Alara looked up, meeting his crimson eyes. "Who wrote that?" "King Aldrich the Unbroken. After he survived his blood tribunal." Kaelin closed the book gently. "I understand him now, in a way I couldn't before you." Alara set aside her papers and moved to sit beside him, their bond marks, silver snowflakes and crimson flames, catching the light as their hands intertwined. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" "Not for a single moment," Kaelin said with such immediate certainty that it made her heart ache. "Though I regret that you had to endure the tribunal, that you had to prove your worth to people who should have recognized it immediately." "I didn't prove anything to them," Alara said thoughtfully. "I proved it to myself. That was the gift, strange as it sounds." She thought about who she had been, the shadow in her family's house, the girl who had learned to disappear to survive. And she thought about who she was now, a voice in council, a reformer, a queen in all but title. The bond mark on her wrist was proof that fate had seen something in her that even she hadn't recognized. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real," she admitted. "That I'm here. That this is my life." Kaelin pulled her closer, his lips brushing against her hair. "Believe it. You earned every moment of it. Not through the bond. That was fate's gift. But everything after? That was you." The next morning, Alara stood in the great hall as Kaelin held court. But she did not stand in the shadows or kneel at the throne's base. She stood beside it, on a dais that had been expanded to accommodate 2 seats, one for the king, one for his equal. Her chair was not quite a throne, but it was close. Carved from the same ancient wood, adorned with silver rather than gold, positioned at Kaelin's right hand where she could see everything he saw, advise when needed, and be seen by every person who entered the hall. A wolf messenger delivered news from the border territories. A vampire noble petitioned for trade rights. A family of Omegas requested an audience to thank Alara personally for the new protections. Through it all, Alara listened, advised, and spoke with an authority she had built from nothing, from survival, from choice, from refusing to let anyone else define her worth. When the court session ended and the hall began to empty, Kaelin reached over and took her hand. Their bond marks glowed softly, a reminder of what they had survived and what they had built together. "Ready for the next battle?" he asked with a slight smile. Alara looked out over the great hall, seeing not the place where she had once been humiliated, but the seat of power where she now helped shape the future. "Always," she said. And she meant it. Because Alara Snowveil had learned the most important truth, that destiny was not about where you started, but about refusing to accept the limitations others tried to place on where you could go. She had been forced to serve a king. Now she stood beside him, not as property, not as ornament, but as partner. And that made all the difference. And there we have it, my beautiful story, family. Alara's journey from shadow to sovereignty, from Omega to equal, from invisible to absolutely unforgettable. What an incredible ride this has been. Now, I want to hear from you. What was your favorite moment in this story? Was it when the bond first awakened in the Great Hall? Was it Alara's powerful speech at the tribunal? Or was it that epic combat scene where love literally gave Kaelin the strength to win? Drop your favorite moment in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love seeing what resonates with you. And here's my challenge for you today. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe in the power of choosing yourself and fighting for what's right, Please share this video with at least one person who needs to hear Alara's message. Share it with someone who's ever felt invisible, underestimated, or told they weren't enough. This story has the power to inspire, but only if you help it reach the people who need it most. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because tomorrow I'm bringing you another story that's equally captivating, equally powerful, and equally impossible to stop watching. Turn on those notifications so you don't miss a single upload. Thank you for being here, for listening, for caring about these characters as much as I do. You make this channel what it is. Until tomorrow, my wonderful story family, keep believing in the power of your own story. See you in the next one.